But Caitlyn Clark did officially put out a statement on Juju Watkins on her Twitter X feed, and it's a fantastic statement. But somehow, some way, people that can't stand Caitlyn Clark are now turning this into something.
Are witnessing the hatred that follows Clark's every move.
Of course, last night during March Madness against Mississippi State, Juju Watkins suffered a horrific injury. Did a video on it this morning. Obviously, we're all pulling for her, all right, to get better. I haven't seen any Caitlyn Clark fans talking negatively about Juju Watkins and that injury or wishing it on her or anything like that. I wish I could say the same for fans of the original WNBA fans when it comes to you-know-who, Caitlyn Clark. And in fact, I think one of them made a live stream about Caitlyn's knee or something like that.
But in a belittling way.
Any reason to try to bring this young lady down. I guess they're jealous. I don't know what it is. Well, yeah, I do. All right. For a lot of them, it's her skin color and her sexual preference. I hate to say that. That is part of this.
One thing I'm going to tell you about the old WNBA fans or the new WNBA fans that are activists that have joined for the culture war, because there's two separate factions. There's the old ones that, been around and just laboring and nothing was ever popping until Caitlyn came along.
Caitlyn Clark, one of the brightest stars in women's basketball, recently posted a supportive message on social media for an injured player, Juju Watkins. A simple act of kindness. A gesture that should have been met with nothing but positive responses. After all, in the world of sports, showing support for a competitor is a fundamental part of the culture. It's expected. But in this case, what was intended as a heartfelt message of encouragement quickly turned into something much darker. Caitlyn Clark, instead of being praised for her sportsmanship, found herself at the center of a heated controversy. What happened? How did a tweet, a few words of kindness, spiral into a firestorm of backlash? Was it really about the words she chose? Or is there something more complex at play here? In a time when social media amplifies every action, no matter how small, it's become impossible to simply share good intentions without backlash. But the story behind the fallout of Clark's tweet reveals something even more troubling. Something that goes beyond basketball. It all began during March Madness, a time when every basketball fan is glued to their screen, watching the most exciting games of the year. In the midst of that excitement, USC's rising star, Juju Watkins, was knocked down with a horrific injury during a game against Mississippi State. It was an unsettling moment. An athlete, young and full of potential, faced a major setback. And like anyone who understands the intensity of sports, you can't help but feel for someone in that position. Especially when it's a peer, someone who has worked hard to get to the top, just like you. Caitlyn Clark, ever the class act, took to her Twitter to show her support. Her message was simple: sending all my thoughts and prayers to Juju. Kid will come back stronger than ever, paired with a red heart emoji. This was Caitlyn Clark, one of the brightest and most popular stars in the sport, offering her support to a competitor in a moment of need. What could be more genuine? It was clear that Clark was simply showing that she understood the weight of the injury and hoped Watkins would return stronger. But this gesture, something so pure and straightforward, was immediately scrutinized by the very fans who should have been united in their respect for both athletes. But the conversation didn't end there. Instead of focusing on the message of solidarity, the conversation shifted. What was the focus of the backlash? The word kid. How did a simple term of affection, a word used often in the sports world, turn into a focal point for attack? How could something so innocuous spark such division? Let's break down how this innocent moment took a wrong turn. As soon as Caitlyn Clark's message hit the internet, the backlash began. Initially, some fans praised her for being kind and supportive, but others seized the opportunity to criticize. And what were they upset about? The word kid. To be clear, Clark was only 3 years older than Watkins. Some critics immediately took to social media, pointing out how they felt Clark, as a fellow player and young athlete, had no right to refer to Watkins as kid. These critics seemed to disregard the context entirely. They ignored the positive tone of the message and instead jumped straight into a critique of a word, which they claimed had negative connotations. Some fans argued that calling a 19-year-old kid was disrespectful, a way of belittling her. Others claimed it was infantilizing, pointing out that Clark, being close in age to Watkins, shouldn't be calling her a kid. The idea that a word so widely used in the sports community could spark such a storm seems laughable at first, doesn't it? And yet, here we are, this single word became the focus of an entire conversation. As the hours passed, the criticism didn't let up. In fact, it only grew stronger. People who had never even watched a game involving either Clark or Watkins suddenly had strong opinions about this one word. Here's where the absurdity kicks in. These same people never seemed to care when players, coaches, or even commentators used kid regularly. It's a term athletes use all the time. Coaches use it for their young players, teammates use it to support one another, and fans use it to cheer on their favorites. But for some reason, when Caitlyn Clark used it to show support for an injured athlete, it became an offense. Why? It seems clear that the word kid was not the problem. The problem was Caitlyn Clark and the fact that she was rising to prominence in a way that made some people uncomfortable. Now, let's really dive into the madness of this situation. The backlash, as ridiculous as it was, highlights something far more concerning. It's not just about one word, kid, that people are taking offense to. It's about the relentless, absurd need to find something wrong, no matter what. Let's unpack the truth here. The word kid is used in sports as a form of encouragement. Athletes often refer to younger players as kid. It's not an insult. It's a sign of camaraderie, a term that signifies support and mentorship. Take a look at any sport. Coaches often refer to their players as kids, whether they're in their teens or their 20s. It's not about the age difference. It's about a connection between individuals who share the same passion. It's about offering support during tough times and reminding each other that they're all in this together. So why, suddenly, is this term being used as ammunition to tear Caitlyn Clark down? The fact that these critics have chosen to focus on this word and not the supportive nature of the message speaks volumes. What's even more bizarre is that the critics weren't just upset about the word. They were upset about Caitlyn Clark. They didn't like the idea of her, someone who is both an incredible athlete and an icon of women's sports, reaching out to another player with empathy. This is about tearing down someone who is excelling, rising to the top, and bringing attention to the sport in a way that no one else has in recent history. The outrage surrounding Kid is just a symptom of a larger problem, a problem that goes beyond this tweet and points to the discomfort some people feel about Caitlyn Clark's success. And of course, things took an even more absurd turn when race entered the conversation. Critics not only took issue with the word kid, but some tried to twist it into something racial. They claimed that Caitlyn Clark's use of the term had racial undertones, given that Watkins is black and Clark is white. They suggested that the use of kid could be seen as condescending and disrespectful because of the racial dynamic at play. Let's be clear, there is no evidence that Watkins took offense to Clark's message. In fact, there's been no indication that she found the word offensive at all. But that didn't stop some critics from pushing this narrative. It's deeply frustrating to see this race element being injected into a conversation where it doesn't belong. There's absolutely no indication that Clark was doing anything but offering her support. She wasn't using the word kid in a derogatory way. She wasn't trying to put Watkins down. She was simply sending well wishes. But some people, seemingly desperate to create conflict, took a word that's used in sports regularly and tried to turn it into a racial issue. The sad reality here is that it wasn't about the word at all. It was about Clark being a young, successful, and visible player who represented change in the sport. And some people weren't ready for that change. So, what is this really about? This isn't about the word kid. This isn't about a single phrase used in a tweet. This is about Caitlyn Clark's meteoric rise to stardom and the way that success threatens some parts of the sports world. For some people, Clark represents everything that is new and disruptive. She's breaking records, bringing unprecedented attention to women's basketball, and challenging the established norms. And for some people, that's too much to handle. They're not upset about her words, they're upset about her success. Caitlyn Clark's popularity isn't just changing the game, it's reshaping the narrative around women's sports. She's become the face of a new era, one where women's basketball is finally getting the recognition it deserves. But that success doesn't sit well with everyone. There are people in the sport who feel threatened by this shift. They don't like how Clark's presence has drawn so much attention, and they certainly don't like how she's challenging the old guard. These critics want to tear her down because they're uncomfortable with the success she represents. It's not about a word, it's about the larger, more uncomfortable truth. Caitlyn Clark is a disruptor, and disruptors aren't always welcomed with open arms. What makes this situation even more troubling is the silence from the WNBA. Here's a league that is experiencing record growth, largely thanks to Caitlyn Clark's success, and yet they remain silent in the face of these attacks. By not addressing the toxicity surrounding their biggest star, the league is allowing this negativity to grow. The WNBA should be protecting its stars, especially someone as influential as Caitlyn Clark, but instead, it has allowed a vocal minority to define the narrative. The WNBA has a responsibility to step up and speak out when their players are being unfairly attacked. When Clark is being criticized for something as harmless as using the word kid, the league should be defending her. This silence is sending the wrong message, not just to Clark, but to fans and potential players alike. The league has an opportunity to foster a positive, supportive environment, but if they remain quiet, they risk alienating the very people who are driving the growth of women's basketball. The silence from the WNBA is complicity. The league's inaction is allowing the negative voices to gain ground, and that's dangerous for the future of the sport. So, what does all of this tell us? Caitlyn Clark's supportive message for an injured player was twisted and weaponized by critics. It wasn't about the word kid. It was about Caitlyn Clark herself, the way she's changing the game, the way she's making an impact, and the way some people are uncomfortable with her success. The irony here is staggering. Clark's critics didn't care about the spirit of the message. They only cared about tearing her down. The word kid was a convenient excuse to fuel their attacks. As fans, we should be celebrating Caitlyn Clark's success, her sportsmanship, and her ability to uplift women's sports. Instead, we're witnessing a campaign to diminish her achievements and change the narrative surrounding her. The question now is, will we let this negativity define the future of women's basketball, or will we stand behind the athletes who are working tirelessly to make the sport better? Caitlyn Clark is just one example of how success often breeds resentment. But her story is also a reminder of why we need to support our athletes and why it's important to challenge negativity in all forms. It's time to choose. Let's embrace the bright future of women's basketball and reject the toxic environment that seeks to tear it down.